40 anni di lavoro in campagna sono stati sacrifici da schiavi.
Tornassi indietro non lo farei più questo lavoro.
Ho fatto 42 anni di lavoro e basta, sono stanco, basta.
La rabbia che ho addosso la riservo solo ai padroni e agli sfruttatori.
Purtroppo ci trattano da schiavi, è inutile che ci trattano da schiavi, purtroppo.
Non lavora con un caporale Luigi, lui lavora proprio direttamente con un'azienda. Lavora con un padrone.
Sì, meglio non parlare.
Padrone. Lui lavora proprio con un padrone.
Enter the meeting number followed by pound.
C'ho le ernie tutte da
Speak here. You can hear. If you
From where?
from your PC. 1, 2, 1. Ah yes, but no, because
No, ma capisco. No, ma chiaro, ci manda. Però niente, sì. Io non penso ci sia nessun problema, però così se vuole fare un test. Va bene. In casa scrivimi. Ciao. Pronto, Matte? Ehi.
voilà.
Ok, non ce l'avevo. Benifei non lo sapevo. Forse devo fare così.
You need to.
No, ma devi provare a venire senza fare così. Le opening lo ricordo adesso arriva un mio collega con i punti precise e gli ha parlato telefono con lui. Che magari poi aspettare che intanto arriva un altro bici del mio collega. Effetti avversi del vaccino, ho fatto due vaccini ieri, è possibile che... Però vabbè, proviamo a venire a fare così. Però dai.
Ok, doesn't
Non
Prega, si sente casci, ma fa qua. E poi ma c'è questi qua. E poi andiamo a a casa.
L'agricoltura sociale è un tipo di agricoltura che non è fondata sul profitto soltanto, ma cerca anche di includere, cerca di coinvolgere
Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti a questo evento finale di un lungo processo durato ben 1 anno e mezzo. Siamo lieti qui di avere voi in sala e le persone in collegamento online. Qualche ritardo come spesso succede e cominciamo subito con il dare il benvenuto a Massimiliano Tarantino, direttore della Fondazione Feltrinelli, che ha sponsorizzato l'intera operazione di EU-MED. Benvenuto, buongiorno.
Grazie.
E poi anche a Gilles Pelayo, please, Head of Unit, Citizens and EU Values, European Commission. Welcome today. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
And Brando Benifei, MEP, SD, will be here at the closing remark a little bit later today, not immediately. So I would say that we can actually start with the introduction by Mr. Tarantino.
Grazie. Buongiorno a tutte e a tutti, buongiorno e grazie di essere qui e grazie anche a chi ci sta ascoltando attraverso lo streaming in diretta sui nostri canali. Ringrazio sentitamente a nome della Fondazione Gian Giacomo Feltrinelli l'onorevole Benifei con cui abbiamo organizzato questa iniziativa e Gilles Pelayo dell'Agenzia Esecutiva Europea per l'Istruzione e la Cultura. Thank you very much. Grazie alla quale il programma ha avuto questo esito così positivo che oggi abbiamo la possibilità di illustrarvi. Parto con 2 note introduttive della Fondazione Gian Giacomo Feltrinelli per inquadrare l'istituzione che rappresento. L'istituzione è un centro di documentazione primariamente e di ricerca nel campo delle scienze storiche, economiche e sociali con sede a Milano. Promuoviamo il dibattito sulle grandi sfide del nostro tempo, dai temi dei diritti sul lavoro alle nuove forme di cittadinanza, dalle nuove economie alle trasformazioni che caratterizzano le nostre città e i nostri territori, dalla rivoluzione digitale alla transizione socio-ecologica. Il tutto partendo dalla storia e dallo studio della storia, come lente utile per analizzare il presente e fare in modo che determinate situazioni tipiche del Novecento non si ripetano. Per un centro come la Fondazione, che promuove cultura e ha fede nella cultura, risulta fondamentale interrogarsi su uno dei temi più urgenti del nostro tempo, nonché una delle dinamiche di più lunga vita, le migrazioni umane. Migrazioni che sono un fenomeno che è sempre esistito e che sempre esisterà. È un fatto quindi storico e strutturale, un fenomeno complesso che va affrontato e governato e non contrastato. Non è un pericolo, non è qualcosa che viene a disturbare la nostra società. È piuttosto un'opportunità, una ricchezza che è fondamentale raccontare come tale. Per ottenere consenso su questo tema occorre rimodellare le visioni e le percezioni delle migrazioni e dare impulso a contronarrative sul fenomeno migratorio, sulla xenofobia e sulla discriminazione. Contronarrative che in primo luogo dovrebbero prendere in considerazione la vulnerabilità dei migranti e puntare a contrastare il razzismo e la disinformazione. Per questo è importante essere oggi a Bruxelles. Abbiamo voluto radunare voi, radunare i partner di progetto e dare una consistenza pubblica ai 18 mesi del progetto EU-MED. È importante, dicevo, essere a Bruxelles con tutti voi, con tutti i partner di Engaging Citizens in Understanding Migration through Cross-Border Exchange and Intercultural Dialogue, finanziato dal programma Europe for Citizens. Dicevo 18 mesi che hanno attraversato 5 paesi europei e che oggi concludiamo. L'obiettivo di EU-MED era ed è ampliare il dialogo sulle migrazioni nello spazio euro-mediterraneo, comprendere il fenomeno guardandolo da diverse prospettive, in primis attraverso il prisma dell'esperienza vissuta in prima persona dai migranti. Da questo punto di vista il senso politico di EU-MED è quello di trovare un'alternativa alle narrative xenofobe sul fenomeno migratorio, offrendo ai cittadini europei fatti, testimonianze, sguardi alternativi. cultura alternativa. Lo abbiamo fatto nei mesi passati attraverso una serie di iniziative pubbliche, adottando differenti approcci e modalità: dibattiti pubblici, esposizioni fotografiche, concerti, mostre di fumetti, cene multiculturali, festival, workshop, iniziative all'aperto. Un modo per includere diverse fasce della popolazione, perché è un tema assolutamente generazionalmente trasversale. Modalità che hanno intercettato più dimensioni di scala e hanno facilitato il confronto multi-stakeholder tra istituzioni, comunità di pratiche, ricercatori, cittadini e migranti, che hanno cercato, le nostre modalità, di creare collegamenti orizzontali tra organizzazioni della società civile, migranti appunto, istituzioni, politica e cittadinanza, in una sorta di collegamento verticale tra dimensioni locali, nazionali e regionali, che sono state realizzate, le nostre iniziative, in città e luoghi simbolo, zone di confine, spazi culturali, centri che lavorano direttamente con rifugiati e persone con background migratorio. Partendo dalle voci raccolte nel corso del progetto, combinate all'esperienza delle diverse associazioni partner, abbiamo deciso di portare qua oggi uno spaccato dei temi chiave e di quanto emerso nel percorso. Iniziamo dalle frontiere, con Agora Europe e SOS Razzismo. Si parla spesso dei migranti clandestini, ma in assenza di adeguati canali legali per le migrazioni, la clandestinità è una condizione obbligata. Questo si traduce in rischi che riguardano in particolare donne e minori, comportando la violazione dei diritti umani. Rischi presenti non solo nell'attraversamento delle frontiere esterne, ma anche in quelle interne dell'Unione Europea. La clandestinità fa da contraltare alla libertà di movimento di chi ha la cittadinanza europea. La migrazione spesso non è una scelta. Artifarti ha messo in luce come il progressivo peggioramento delle condizioni ambientali in diversi paesi del sud del mondo stia costringendo sempre più persone a migrare. Sono i cosiddetti rifugiati climatici. Si tratta di una categoria ancora non conosciuta dalla normativa e pertanto non tutelata. Il numero di persone in fuga dai cambiamenti climatici, alla luce dell'assenza di politiche di contrasto al cambiamento climatico, è destinata ad aumentare esponenzialmente nel prossimo futuro. Gli immigrati ci rubano il lavoro. Questa è una delle inchieste che la Fondazione Feltrinelli, con una punta di provocazione, ha realizzato in questi mesi. Un'inchiesta che è partita dal fenomeno del caporalato in ambito agricolo, mettendo in luce come il non riconoscimento della cittadinanza dei migranti che vivono e lavorano sui territori contribuisca alla povertà diffusa dei territori medesimi, portando alla svalutazione delle città, dei luoghi, delle campagne abitate. Abbiamo poi guardato al fenomeno della seconda generazione, cittadini italiani che non sono riconosciuti come tali, una grande questione politica. Senza pratiche di cittadinanza inclusiva continueranno a sentirsi stranieri in terra straniera. E quindi la lente di genere aggiunge ulteriore complessità al fenomeno della migrazione. In questo senso, Studio Europa Maastricht ha messo in luce il fenomeno della discriminazione diretta delle donne migranti, non solo durante l'attraversamento dei confini, ma nei paesi di accoglienza. È assolutamente urgente la creazione di percorsi di accoglienza e inclusione per contrastare queste forme di discriminazione pesante. Laddove spesso la solidarietà istituzionale è assente, interviene la società civile, come visto anche con Amel France. Pratiche solidaristiche del quotidiano ci raccontano di un'Europa che non vede migranti e rifugiati come diversi, ma come parte di un tessuto sociale complesso, composito, che può portare a maggiore ricchezza e maggiore coesione. EU-MED ha prestato ascolto ad una molteplicità di voci e in questo senso il progetto è stato estremamente ricco e ha puntato ad ampliare il dibattito e a dare un contributo per una visione plurale, complessiva, aperta della narrativa sui migranti, senza timore della complessità insita del lavoro su queste tematiche. Il punto di arrivo di EU-MED sono quindi gli elementi necessari per costruire una contronarrativa efficace. L'oggetto delle narrative xenofobe, che sembrano avere una forte presa politica, è una semplificazione estrema dell'esperienza di chi migra, attribuendo motivi e intenzioni che alla prova dei fatti non esistono. Un esempio è il dibattito sulla cittadinanza dei migranti in Italia, esemplificato dal cosiddetto ius scholae. I motivi che vengono attribuiti alla riforma sono quelli di promuovere la sostituzione su base etnica degli italiani. Nei fatti sappiamo che la cittadinanza democratica ha in passato permesso di contrastare l'emarginazione e l'esclusione sociale ed è stata un potente motore per la vita civile. Pensiamo agli immigrati italoamericani e alla loro partecipazione nella vita democratica degli Stati Uniti d'America. Un processo che ha richiesto generazioni e un immenso impegno politico che impegna tutti noi cittadini europei oggi. La rimozione dei migranti dalla sfera della partecipazione attiva democratica è un impoverimento. Significa rimuovere dalle arene decisionali le esperienze, il vissuto, gli obiettivi di potenziali cittadini, creando in ultima analisi zone d'ombra dove la democrazia non può intervenire e rendendo la vita politica e civile più povera, perché privata di input molto preziosi. Così garantire i diritti dei migranti non è solamente un bene per gruppi spesso ai margini, ma un allargamento dei diritti su base collettiva, quindi noi compresi. Crea società più coese, più solidali, più resilienti. In questa prospettiva l'approccio prismatico adottato da EU-MED ci sembra particolarmente efficace. Ringrazio quindi Agora Europe, con cui è stato immaginato dagli albori il progetto, Artifarti, Studio Europa Maastricht, SOS Razzismo, Amel France. Ringrazio gli onorevoli Bartolo e Moretti per aver accettato il nostro invito a parlare di questi temi e tutti voi per questo importante momento di incontro che noi interpretiamo anche come uno stimolo a continuare su queste contronarrative, su queste nuove politiche che devono includere non solo noi istituzioni di ricerca, ma i cittadini sul terreno della costruzione di una nuova Europa. Grazie.
Grazie mille a Massimiliano Tarantino. Thank you to Massimiliano Tarantino. And the project has been done in collaboration with the European Commission. And so I invite Gilles Pelaye to explain to us the work that's been done and how it has developed. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, first of all, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here with you, with Chiara Sorge, who has been the project advisor accompanying this project on its journey in the past, let's say, couple of years or so. Starting with congratulations, let's say, to the project for having been carried out, because the project has been resilient, displaying some of the qualities that many migrants or asylum seekers need to have. It's survived a very selective process. Of our last call for proposal for 2020, it was we only selected 30 projects out of nearly 600. So congrats for that already. And it's been implemented despite COVID, despite confinement, etc. So already congrats for that. It's a project that is somehow emblematic of the projects we've been supporting with the Europe for Citizens projects between the years 2014 until 2020, in the sense that, as you've been presenting, it doesn't shy away from exploring alternatives to what the EU policy is, to what it does. The Europe for Citizens program is not an institutional communication program. I mean, institutional communication is fair enough, but that's not what it is. It's not either some kind of propaganda program on what the European does. Its objective is to support projects that give life to European democracy. So it's not afraid of supporting projects proposing alternative visions of what the European should be doing, for instance, on this very important topic of the migration policy and of migrants. It's very valuable to explore different narratives. It's true that narrative perceptions of such important topics do shape policies at the local level, policies at the national level. Indeed, migration is a very powerful topic at the national level, as we see again recently in many countries, and also at the EU level of governance, of course. So it's really welcome to support projects, in our opinion, that explore, as I said, different views on this. So it's really good to have this, to engage citizens, European citizens with the project. We are, let's say, not an academic program in the sense that we want to support projects based on, of course, social sciences, hard facts, and sound analysis. But the name of the game is to create this European demos, a European polity. It means that engaging actively a maximum number of citizens is part of the objectives we pursue. So I will leave really the floor to those who have given life to this project. I would just conclude by saying that the Europe for Citizens program is no more, but it's been like a phoenix, reinvented and regenerated with an even, let's say, bigger and more ambitious program that is called now the Citizens Equality, Rights and Values Program. The acronym is CHEV in Brussels bubble jargon, and notably in no small part thanks to this institution, the European Parliament. Indeed, it's been endowed with more funding. So we are able to continue at the European Commission and through the Education and Culture Executive Agency to support such projects for the years to come as part of the citizens engagement, what we call the citizens engagement strand of our program. So congrats again. We're looking forward to listening to the outcomes of the project and the views of the different partners. And thanks for the invitation again.
Thank you very much. And but we have mentioned the Progetto EU-MED. Let's go a little bit more in detail to understand what was this project in practical terms. So it's been basically, imagine a journey, an immersion experience into migration, starting that spans across 6 different countries, starting in Italy, in the south of Italy, in Palermo, in Sicily, where that has been for many years now at the center of immigration, not only to Italy, but to Europe in general, the Mare Nostrum, the southern Mediterranean. And then as went to Maastricht, Maastricht, the town where there are a lot of refugees that are women, and they're dealing every day with the problems of sex and status and being an immigrant, which is not easy even in societies that are more inclusive. And the project has brought us to Brussels, where every day, in a way or another, we talk about solidarity, institutional solidarity, welcoming, civil society, the role, how to improve it. And there are fights and discussions and people that want to bring it forward, people that are a little more wary of more integration, but where the discussions are always lively. And then Grenoble in France, which where there are many refugee camps, and also in the Basque countries, Azaroa, where we spoke about, again, multiculturalism. And then in Paris, before Mr. Tarantino mentioned the climate refugees, which is one of the themes at the center of this discussion, of the dialogue that all members of society should have at this time. We have seen 2022 is basically the hottest year, again, a new record ever since 19th century, but ever. I mean, we are having mosquitoes and it's almost November, just, you know, to give a measure of the situation. So, and people that are running away from extreme situations need to be taken account for. In Europe, we are still behind with the policies on that regards. And then the project and the discussion moved to Brindisi. Brindisi is in the south of Italy. I don't know if you know how Italy is shaped. There is a hill. And that region is an agricultural region, Puglia, and it's full of tomatoes, and it's full of migrants that work in the camps. But all they work in very inhumane conditions, and they are exploited instead of welcomed. And it's a really difficult situation that still has not been solved. Then the project moved the border between Spain and France, and where we spoke about internal frontiers. We have Schengen, but as you guys know, sometimes it gets suspended. And so we have some internal barriers that shouldn't be there, especially when immigrants are involved. So it's good to talk about that and the opportunities of those obstacles. And then to Milan, which is probably the more modern and advanced city in Italy, and where we talk about work all the time, and also formative routes for immigrants and for young Italians, or we should say immigrants of second generations that should be Italians, for instance, but they are still not, because we don't have an appropriate law there. And with the new government, it doesn't look like we'll have a new law in the near future. So it's a very composite, who knows? Yeah, well, maybe we know that one, though. Or we can guess. Although the future is very uncertain, especially in these times that are very fluid all over the world. But the project was a way to talk about these issues with a positive outlook, without putting the emphasis on discrimination of the migrants, but putting the emphasis on how they can be accepted and how they can enrich an old and wide society like the European ones, which already is based on variety and diversity internally. And so in theory should be even more, should have the right tools to welcome more diversity and more variety and be enriched by it. And that's why during the process, I can call it a project that was a process. There have been many public debates on these issues, on the various aspects of immigration. There have been photographic exhibitions and concerts and multicultural dinners, festivals, workshops, outside initiatives. You know, when there is a little sun and we're all outside, it's a little bit easier to talk and exchange than being on the desk on a chair inside like now. And it's been a great opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to the takeaways that our guests that are coming now here to speak are going to give us from this initiative. So, without any further ado, I would ask the speakers to come on here next to me, maybe. Thank you. Thank you to Gilles, and thank you to Massimiliano. And I'm welcoming now Caterina Di Fazio from Agora Europe and Radboud University. Caterina, here she comes. Welcome, Caterina. And then Imanol Legarda, SOS Racismo. Welcome. Juliette Joss, Artifarti. I'm really curious about that one now and what you guys do. And Pietro Bartolo, European MEP that's been very, very active in Italy for years on the immigration issues. Please join us here. And we can start. Please, take a seat. Perfetto, tanto abbiamo una traduzione. So they can speak in Italian or in English, it's the same thing. We have a translation. We are up to speed and ready to go. So I would start giving, first of all, listening to your introductory remarks. I would start with you.
Thank you. So I'm here as president of Agora Europe, a series on human mobility we co-created at Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne University and Columbia University back in 2018, which is now a no-profit organization in Andaille that has been mentioned, and you can also see some pictures from our event there. Andaille is a tiny little city in the south of France, but the Atlantic coast, and it's bordering with Spain on what we call the Basque border, the Atlantic border between France and Spain. But I was also working at Maastricht University as a postdoc. Now I'm at Radboud, so I was also involved in the Maastricht event on women discrimination in relation to migration. With Agora Europe, we did two events. One was in Palermo. That's the first pictures you see, was the very first event we organized, I think, in the EU-MED series. And the second one was in Andaille. In Andaille, where, as you were saying, it's one of the cases where Schengen gets suspended. Yeah. So one of the idea of the EU-MED project at the very basis of the EU-MED project was to look at Europe from both sides, from the European side and from the Mediterranean side, from the other side. So ways in which we look at Europe from abroad, from the other side. A second idea was to look at cross-border regions. So that is the case for both Andaille and Maastricht, of course. To look at ways in which citizens perceive migration and migration issues and potentiality across EU member states. And also look both at internal borders and external borders. This is what we needed to do, in particular when we had to, and we decided to do events in Palermo, so looking at external borders and maritime routes, in particular the Central Med, the Central Mediterranean route, and in Andaille, where we're looking at the Atlantic route. Now, we can see in general that the effect of the agreements with Turkey, Libya, and Morocco kind of pushed towards the west, the maritime routes, to the point that the Atlantic route or Canaries route was recently reopened and was renamed even Arguineguín-Irún. Now, Arguineguín is the port in Gran Canaria. It's one of the main ports in the Canary Islands. And Irún is the city facing Andaille on the Spanish side. The two cities, Andaille and Irún, are separated by a very tiny river called Bidasoa. Some people at the Parliament heard about it, sadly. So with the dramatic consequence that deaths by drowning started happening also on European internal borders and waters, so not just in international waters, and in particular in the Bidasoa River. So we got to over 10 deaths, and this was an issue that was brought at the European Parliament already in 2020. But the situation didn't change. The bridges are still closed. This opened up the question, of course, of political responsibility. Now, on the one hand, this was one of the main points of the EU-MED project, focusing on cross-border areas, as we did, is central if we want to tackle the issue of migration perception among European citizens and across European countries. And this is relevant to creating this European engagement, the engagement of European citizens. On the other hand, though, this is one of the main points that we looked at with the two events organized by Agora Europe. It is more and more clear that the consequence of the absence of legal pathways for migration, and in particular for labor migration, is not only discrimination at a narrative level and at a physical level, because of what many migrants are experiencing, which one of our partners, SOS Racisme, called racism, border racism or frontier racism across both EU internal and external borders. But more drastically, that where safe passage is not guaranteed, migration routes become more and more dangerous, and the number of people on the move dying is continuously rising. So that's the main issue. So facing the Ukraine crisis, in relation to which another one of our partners had to talk about EU migration policy as a policy at two speeds, de facto dividing populations in two classes of humanity. This is why racism needs to be tackled as one of the main issues related to migration. And also when we want to tackle the climate crisis with the consequence of the number of asylum seekers and climate refugees and migrants rising, the only solution is the promotion of legal and safe pathways for migration, particularly for labor migration, as migrants start to be considered primarily as workers, and focusing on the Green Deal and the green sectors. This is where we should look at. So the only crisis that the EU is currently facing right now is the demographic crisis. And the only crisis, the real crisis that we're actually confronting at a global level is the climate crisis. The answer to both crises is the creation of legal and safe pathways for migration. This is something I think we should look at when looking at ways to discuss and implement the EU Pact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll talk about legal pathways with Mr. Bartolo, but before that, lo sai. So parliamo di questo, ma prima di andare lì, just a few minutes before, I would like to give the word to Mr. Lagarda from SOS Racismo, and who's going to talk about
well, the aforementioned Vidasoa River and that border crossing.
Border crossing, fantastic.
Prima di tutto grazie a tutti, in speciale alla Fondazione per fare possibile di essere qui. I know that the project had like a positive highlight, but what I'm going to talk about is not that positive, I'm sorry. But I will try to make it light. As I've mentioned, I'm from the Basque Country, that it's been mentioned before that I'm going to talk about the Basque border. There is a Basque poem written 50 years ago in 1973. It's called Mendian Galdu Zirenei, which in Basque means to those who got lost in the mountain. And it's a cry of African people dying in our Basque surroundings. As I've said, it's almost 50 years ago when it was written, but it could have been written just today. Just last year, in 2021, 1,680 people died, at least, in the Mediterranean Sea. But that number gets higher if we take it into account that many die even before getting to the Mediterranean during the African routes, and especially during the desert. But that number should also be higher if we consider that migrants also die once they reach the European Union. As you've mentioned before, I'm going to talk about inner borders inside the European Union. I come from San Sebastian. I'm not sure if you will know it. It's in the Basque Country. In the north coast, it's a coastal little city in the north of the Iberic Peninsula. And it's very, very close from Irún, which is the other city that Caterina mentioned. Both are in the region of, and as they already explained you, there is a river called Soa with a few bridges that within a walking distance you can get to Endaya, which is another little city, but which already belongs to the French state. As I've said, it's a walking distance, and people usually cross those bridges for many reasons, like many work on one side and go to the other back home. I've crossed that many times just to go to the beach. And for instance, not those bridges, but I crossed that border yesterday just to get to the airport to come here, so it's not such a big deal. And I've never been stopped there. But the thing is that I am white, and that's why I've never been stopped there. If they assume, by they I mean the French police forces, if they assume that you are coming from Africa, you will face de facto migration control there. And you've mentioned it before, but how is it possible, right? Both Spain and France are both part of the European Union, and they are part of the Schengen space, so such a control shouldn't exist. Well, I'm sure all of you will remember that in 2015 there was a terrible terrorist attack in Paris in the Bataclan shooting. When that happened, France declared the state of emergency, and that state of emergency allowed that control to be there. The thing is that that control should have lasted no more than 6 months. It was supposed to be temporary. it was in order to guarantee the national security of France, but it's been renewed systematically since then, and we are now in 2022. The French Council of State renews it systematically, even if it's prohibited by the judgment of the Court of Justice in the European Union. Let's be clear with one thing. That border control is not about terrorism. It's based on a technicality, but it's a migration control. And as you all know, the first article of the Schengen Code states that such control shouldn't exist. And on top of that, on top of the existence itself of the control, the practices there are not legal either. Because I've said before that I've never been stopped there, and everything on if they assume that you are coming from Africa, but how do they assume that? It's by racial profiling. And that racial profiling blocked many, many people in the city of Irun. I would also like to add that from a just utilitarianism point of view, or just on a practical note, it doesn't avoid people getting into France. It just makes them more vulnerable. It violates their human rights, and it puts them in even a bigger risk. But it doesn't work as a blocking of the migration there. What it does is a lot of them get stuck in Irun, and we are really, really thankful that on both sides of the rivers, both in Irun and in Endai, there are organizations and especially citizen networks, just regular citizens who organize themselves to assist these people in need. And they provide an assistance that is not provided by the public administrations in general. So we are really, really thankful to them, and especially to Irungo Arreras Area. It's the welcoming citizen network from Irun, with whom we work closely. But as I've said, the control doesn't actually work. It only violates the human rights of these humans, that I would like to highlight that they are humans, even if sometimes it seems to be forgotten. And it is not a crime to look for a better and safer conditions. It's actually a fundamental human right. But some of them still want to cross, so they look for other alternatives, and they are very dangerous, and especially the ones involving the river. I would say I'm a fair swimmer, and I'm not sure if I will dare to cross that river swimming, even if I kind of know it. So still, many of them, out of desperation, they cross it. And I would like to remember Ibrahim Diallo and Abdurrahman Ba. Ibrahim was from Senegal and Abdurrahman was from Guinea-Conakry, both of them who died in the river this year. But those are not the only names that I would like to remember. I would also like to mention Tesfit Temside, Abdullahi Koulibaly, Yaya Karamoko, Sohaibo Villa, Mohamed Kamal, Faisal Kamadouche, and a seventh non-identified person, all of them who died in 2021. Let's hope that these are the last names in this terrible, terrible list. But sometimes hope is not enough. So I would like to take advantage of this of me being here to please beg every single one of to do actually something to take practical action so that they are indeed the last human beings dying at the Bidasoa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, migration, immigration in the latest years has always been intertwined with death. Death in the sea, death in the rivers, death in the water in general, and still ways to stop them. Real ways haven't been found, not because it's not possible, but often because it's not agreed upon. And speaking of water and raising waters, I will give the word to Juliette Josse, who is speaking about climate refugees.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to my colleagues, Caterina and Emmanuel, for such a great introduction and words that I think that needs to be heard. So I'm representing Atfati today. Atfati is an association based in Lyon, in Cultural European Association. We've been advocating for youth and culture and emerging cultures and democratic debate for 20 years now, through many events such as Nuit Sonore Festival that you may know, and the European Lab Forums. We do such events in Europe and France and Brussels every year. And when we had the opportunity to join the EU-MED cooperation, we accepted very easily because, well, first it shares our values, and we believe that culture had a role in spreading new narratives about migration in this cooperation, especially for the youth and youngsters. So we learned a lot. We're not a migration experts, but we have an audience and a youth one, so we wanted to tackle this topic. In a world where information is overwhelmed with words such as migration crisis, xenophobia, narratives is a big danger and can lead to a freeze of action and worse, inward-looking attitudes, and that's why we fight against. So we decided to tackle, one of the topics we decided to tackle was climate refugees. What is a climate refugee? Climate is not the right word, because we should say environment, because climate is one of the things that happens to the world. But that's the word we will use. A few weeks after the status quo of the COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021, we wanted to detail the consequences of climate change on migratory phenomena through the story of the journalist Samuel Turpin and the migration expert Sarah Prestiani, and finally François Gémen, the Belgian expert in geopolitics of the environment of migration. This event, so European Lab event, gave us insight about climate refugees and some data that I will speak about. So first, extreme climate events are the first reason of migration, approx 25 million approximately for 1 year in last 15 years. So it's a huge number. And so there is this extreme events, and there are progressive phenomena such as rising water, desertification, decline in soil fertility. Those two parameters, I would say, require different politics, because they are not the same events. But the problem is that there is a problem in the majority narrative about them. So what we learn with François Gémen is that first, we hear climate refugees are supposed to be in the future, but they're not in the future. They are happening now, and they have been migrating for years now. Two, difference between economic and political refugee. Why there is a difference between an economic migrant and a political refugee when they are actually crossing reason that they are moving. They're not just one. And then third, migration is being told as a threat and need to be avoided. Why such narrative is being told? Migration always existed. It's not new. It's like a phenomena that happens in societies. And the talk about crisis all the time forces a narrative of closing borders and turning inward to protect ourselves from migration, rather than implementing public policies to actually reduce greenhouse effects and reduce our carbon impact. So, yeah, I guess the stake now is to understand how all the factors, whether it's economic, whether it's political, whether it's climate, that they're all the same and they work together, and that's why people migrate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now here we come. We don't have apparently a translation, simultaneous translation. So we'll translate. No, not chat. We'll do as much as we can. Just me translating, if you allow. Okay. So Abbiamo parlato dei canali, dei famosi canali immigratori. A che punto è la situazione e come la vede? We spoke about immigration channels, so far legal channels into Europe. So I was wondering how he thinks the situation is at the moment. What are the possibilities of obtaining these channels and what is being done at the moment?
Sì, intanto grazie per questa opportunità, grazie per parlare, perché si parlerà continuamente, sarà il tema, come dire, più importante in Europa, insomma un po' questo tema mi pare che prende tutto il mondo, per cui il tema della migrazione sarà, diciamo, quello che sarà molto discusso. Fra l'altro io sono il relatore ombra per quanto riguarda proprio il patto sulla migrazione e asilo, quindi che si occupa di RAM, che dovrebbe essere, come dire, quel dossier che dovrebbe modificare il regolamento di Dublino.
So thank you so much, and we are going to talk about immigration a lot, not only in Europe but all over the world. It's the theme of this time, and Mr. Bartoli is also the shadow rapporteur for the modification of the Dublin Pact. If you guys said Dublin Treaty, if you guys know what it is, it's the treaty in Europe that determines where a migrant that arrives on a European soil should go, in which country. And so far, there's not been any modification, and all the countries that are more exposed to the arrival of migrants have to take charge. According to the Dublin Treaty, they have to take care of the migrants, which imposes an unfair burden on just a few countries within the 27 countries of the European Union. There have been methods of solidarity among certain countries, but there's not been a revision of the pact. No, non abbiamo ancora avuto una revisione.
Non abbiamo avuto una revisione di quello che è il regolamento di Dublino, ne stiamo discutendo, già è stata fatta una proposta nel 2020 da parte della Commissione, quindi della von der Leyen, che ci aveva in qualche modo, come dire, aperto il cuore perché ci ha ingannato.
There's been a proposal done in 2020 from the European Commission, and it really opened our heart because we thought something was being done, but no, we've been cheated.
E quindi si è presentato questo nuovo patto sulla migrazione, che io chiamo pacco sulla migrazione, un bel pacco che ci ha propinato, dove praticamente effettivamente non si parla più del regolamento di Dublino, ma si parla di RAM, che sostituisce, praticamente dovrebbe sostituire Dublino, ma in realtà ripercorre perfettamente la strada del regolamento di Dublino. Quindi con tutte come dire, quelle incombenze che erano sui paesi di primo ingresso, e cioè a dire quindi il principio del paese di primo ingresso è mantenuto, non si parla di ricollocamenti obbligatori e neanche come dire, automatici come si voleva, e tutto invece si fonda per lo più sulla deterrenza, quindi sui rimpatri, su accordi con paesi terzi e quindi anche sui controlli, forti controlli alle frontiere, come si diceva, scusa, come diceva prima il primo relatore, cioè dire che tutto questo è fatto proprio per bloccare, non diciamo aiutare queste persone, ma per bloccarle proprio alle frontiere.
So there's not been a progress on the Dublin Treaty. On the contrary, the proposal put forward by the Commission in 2020, it resembles a lot the Dublin Treaty. It doesn't allow for any mandatory relocation of immigrants, still states that immigrants should stay in the country of first arrival, which is the main problem, as we said, of the treaty. And the main point of the whole new proposal is the deterrence, so which means trying to keep migrants out in any way possible, not finding way to welcoming them in and redistributing them within the 27 countries. So just keeping them out.
Quindi in questo patto sulla migrazione, quindi il dossier che riguarda proprio RAM, si vede proprio ed è evidente questa ostilità nei confronti della migrazione indipendentemente se sono migranti economici, come vengono chiamati, o migranti climatici, o come dice lei, migranti ambientali, ma devo dire che neanche i profughi, neanche i richiedenti asilo ultimamente sono ben accetti. Noi sappiamo che abbiamo visto apertamente che migranti che arrivano, quindi profughi che arrivano dalla Siria e dall'Afghanistan, si ritrovano a essere, come dire, rifiutati, rigettati dall'altra parte e di conseguenza andando in violazione di quelli che sono gli accordi internazionali e non ultima la Convenzione di Ginevra, che invece si basa sul principio del non respingimento. Tutto questo viene violato, devo dire, con come dire, l'intervento anche di Frontex. Voi sapete che Frontex sarebbe la guardia di frontiera, la Guardia Europea di Frontiera, che dovrebbe, come dire, fra i suoi compiti è quello di controllare le frontiere, sì, ma diciamo dovrebbe essere anche quella che deve controllare il rispetto dei diritti umani. Ultimamente, ma non solo ultimamente, la Frontex si è trasformata in un'agenzia che invece, in combutta con i paesi di primo ingresso, alcuni paesi di primo ingresso, non fa altro che respingere queste persone, motivo per cui noi come Parlamento, in primis io l'ho fatto già parecchio tempo fa, abbiamo richiesto, diciamo, una inchiesta sull'attività di Frontex, io ho richiesto anche le dimissioni del direttore generale, cosa che alla fine è successo, ma diciamo da una inchiesta fatta dall'Olaf, che è la Guardia di Finanza Europea, e sono venute, diciamo, delle irregolarità abbastanza gravi perpetrate da parte di Frontex, e di conseguenza abbiamo chiesto anche, abbiamo rifiutato il discarico. Scusa se sarò più breve.
No. So basically, let me summarize all of that. He's saying that not only there are not new ways of welcoming migrants or the new categories of migrants. We were talking about climate migrants, environmental migrants, but not even, asylum seekers, which are the number one basic form of migrants, people running away from wars and from really dire situations. Not even for them, some steps forward have been taken. And he's denouncing the role that the Commission is having on this, and also the role that Frontex, which is an institution that is supposed to protect the European borders, but right now what it's doing is actually pushing migrants away, making sure that migrants don't land on European territory anymore. And there's been some inquiries spurred by the European Parliament into the management of Frontex, which has actually committed some infractions. And that's why in the last session of the European Parliament, right? Frontex, the European Parliament didn't allow nuovi fondi.
Sì, abbiamo
new
bloccato
fundings.
Il discarico dei fondi del 2020, abbiamo bloccato i fondi, quindi non abbiamo accettato il discarico, per cui loro stanno lavorando adesso anche con difficoltà da questo punto di vista, ma è quello che volevamo noi.
The European Parliament blocked the fundings to this agency, Frontex, which I think each of you should know if you're interested in migration, immigration. And without money, it's going to be much harder from Frontex to pursue its aims, which the European Parliament deems to be wrong. And so they're very happy that they are not going to be put in the position of going on with their intentions.
Noi non è che siamo contrari all'agenzia Frontex, perché è ovvio che nei suoi compiti c'è il controllo delle frontiere, perché le frontiere si devono controllare, ovviamente, ma il controllo deve essere nei confronti del terrorismo, della droga, traffico di armi. Questo è il compito principale, e un altro compito, come ho detto prima, è quello di, come dire, far rispettare i diritti umani. Invece il compito principale di Frontex si è trasformato in una caccia al migrante, e quindi questo è assolutamente inaccettabile, motivo per cui noi abbiamo reagito in questo modo. Adesso la nuova direttrice ad interim di Frontex, ha promesso che cambierà tutto, che ovviamente rispetteranno quelli che sono i loro ruoli, il loro mandato. Ecco, noi speriamo in questo, dopodiché ovviamente accetteremo anche, diciamo, il discarico dei fondi a Frontex. Ma, mi fermo qua poi. No, ma io dico che questo modo di affrontare il fenomeno migratorio che fino adesso abbiamo affrontato sia con il regolamento di Dublino, sia per come si vuole affrontare con questo nuovo patto sulla migrazione e asilo, sicuramente non ci porterà da nessuna parte. Abbiamo detto che il regolamento di Dublino, che è lo strumento attuale che governa il fenomeno migratorio, è un fallimento. L'abbiamo detto attraverso anche una risoluzione, la risoluzione Keller, abbiamo detto, abbiamo visto, la storia ce lo dice, perché se qua dopo 30 anni siamo ancora a parlare di emergenza sbarchi, emergenza migranti e tutto quanto, evidentemente abbiamo sbagliato tutto. Mi fermo qua.
Okay, and then, all right, I'm going to translate this bit and then we are going to get to the conclusions because time is running out. But basically saying that it's not against Frontex per se, because the European Union does need an agency that protects the Union, but it should be working on illegal trafficking, arms trafficking, drugs, terrorism, and instead it's becoming an agency who's actually hunting migrants. And so that's why the European Parliament has taken the means that they have. L'ultima cosa che ha detto?
Del nuovo patto che non
cambia
assolutamente niente.
Non cambia perché
And the new solution that's coming up. So basically, European Parliament, even in the last legislature, they had condemned the Dublin Treaty and asked for a reform of the Dublin Treaty. But the new proposal of the Commission doesn't, as we said, doesn't change anything. So I think he's striking a pretty pessimistic note, I should say. I mean, do you have anything good to say? Any sign of optimism? Segno di ottimismo?
Ma sì, io sono 30 anni che sono ottimista, sono 30 anni che mi occupo del fenomeno migratorio, prima a Lampedusa come medico, lo sapete, ho visitato più di 350.000 persone, purtroppo ho dovuto fare una cosa che a me fa tanto male, ma così male che mi vergogno pure a dirlo, di essere il medico che ha fatto più ispezioni cadaveriche del mondo, e questo a me mi fa tanto male, mi fa male anche in questo momento che lo sto dicendo, perché anche ieri sono morti dei bambini a Lampedusa, l'altro ieri ancora altri bambini sono morti a Lampedusa, l'altro ieri ancora nessuno ne parla, eppure questa gente continua a morire in quel mare, in quel mio mare, perché quel mio è il mio mare, quel mare io sono nato in quel mare, ho lavorato in quel mare, sono stato io stesso un naufrago in quel mare, quindi so bene il male che mi fa quando quel mare che mi ha dato tutto mi ha dato, è diventato un cimitero, e questo non è accettabile, è crudele, è immorale. Ecco perché io dico che dovremmo trovare una soluzione che non può essere quella neanche delle ONG, neanche quella di Mare Nostrum, deve essere dei canali regolari, devono essere i corridoi umanitari, perché queste persone non ci devono mettere neanche un piede in quel mare, perché quel mare, sapete, è bello, ma è anche crudele, e lo so io,
So he's saying that we need, we deeply, profoundly, urgently need humanitarian channels for legal immigration to the European Union, because people shouldn't put even a foot in the Mediterranean Sea. He has worked in Lampedusa as a doctor for many years, and he has the sad record of having to check, of being the doctor with the highest number of inspections of corpses of dead people. So he said that the Mediterranean has been turned a sea that he loves, where he grew up by, and where he also was at a certain point lost at sea, but it's been transformed from a beautiful sea into a huge cemetery. So this shouldn't happen. People are still dying. Kids have been dying as we speak in the past 2 days, but now they don't make the news as much as they used to, which is also a big problem. So that's why he's inviting everyone to work on the creation of legal entry channel into the European Union for migrants. Thank you so much. Grazie mille per questo intervento, and thank you so much for your work that you carry on every day. And I think now I just got a little ticket that's telling me that due to time constraint, we are giving the floor to Mrs. Moretti, which I think is with us online, right? I don't know if she's there, if we see her. Huh?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mrs. Moretti, for coming to you. Hi, good morning. We say goodbye to our panel and thank you for your super interesting ideas, reflections, and comments. Thank you. Eccola qua. Arrivederci, è un piacere. Alessandra.
Hello to everybody.
Yes, here you are, and you are working especially in gender issues and migrants, sex inclusion. What are the takeaways from this initiative you have been working with lately?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to discuss with you in this important topic. We are living challenging time. The pandemic started in 2020, changed our priorities, and now the unjustified war in Ukraine has our full attention. However, migration, which was a protagonist of our news before COVID, is still a matter that we have to face. But be careful, we have to face it with a comprehensive and solid policy. We cannot think to simply stop migrants, as some politicians could say, and but Bartolo, my colleagues before, explained very well the problem. Migration is a phenomenon that has existed for as long as man has existed. We cannot imagine to arrest the flows of people moving around the world with walls, armed ships, or blind laws. Migration cannot be stopped, but it certainly can be managed. This is the task of United Europe. I would like today to drive your attention to two focuses that are closely related to migration: climate change and women's rights. Climate change is one of the biggest causes of migration. The effects of this phenomenon force the inhabitants of some areas to leave their homes in search of resources. The scenario for the next years can only get worse. According to recent studies, if the objectives set by the Paris agreements are not maintained, the flow of climate migrants could increase, but by up to 350%. 350%. We still have a chance to act before it's too late. Rapid action is needed to mitigate climate change and reduce the risk of disastrous events, particularly for the most vulnerable populations. But we also need to have for those people who have already had to leave their homes. It seems absurd to think that the international law does not define the status of climate refugee. As I told before, my second point is women's rights. Yes, because talking about migration and climate change, women are those who pay the biggest price. In many countries, due to the organization of the society and the role attributed to women and girls, those are facing the effect of climate change in the front line. For example, usually they are in charge of looking for water, food, feed the children. If the habit is inhospitable because of drought, high temperatures, or other situations, women will struggle in doing their work. Moreover, often husbands, fathers, or brothers leave the country to look for a new start abroad, and women and girls have to survive alone. Another point regards women's health before, during, and after the pregnancy, for example, or in general, the sexual and reproductive health. Women need a special care. It's a right that, if not guaranteed, could put in danger their life. Migration can also open terrible scenarios to women: trafficking of human beings, forced prostitution, sexual abuses, slavery. Women have many more probabilities to become victims of those terrible crimes than men does. In the European Parliament, inside the Environment Committee and in the Women's Rights Committee, those are my battles. The European Union needs a serious and solid mechanism based on solidarity, both towards people fleeing wars, persecution, or lack of primary resources, and solidarity towards countries on the borders of the European Union that have found themselves alone in managing this complex phenomenon. EU can no longer think of confining migrants and asylum seekers to the external borders of the Union. EU needs trade agreements that respect human rights and the rights of workers in third countries so that they can build a future in their lands. We have to stop selling weapons to countries that wage wars by forcing civilians to flee when they manage to survive. We have to assure women their fundamental rights and the tools to be actors of change in their society, not just a victim. And so we have a lot of issues in front of us, difficult issues, but we have to be united because we have showed inside the pandemic that could be possible to be united. And also on these human rights, we have to be more and more united than now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Moretti, for this intervention. And I would give now the floor to Annelies van Riegen, who's actually tagging along on the gender and migration issue.
Yes. Thank you, Federica. So my name is Annelies van Rijen. I work at Studio Europa Maastricht, an organization in Maastricht. We are funded by the city of Limburg, the city of Maastricht, the province of Limburg, and the university. And we foster public debate and dialogue on European affairs, but also interdisciplinary research on European affairs. So the European for Citizen Grant allowed us to organize an event in September 2021. The event was called Meet Up Local and Migrant Women about the challenges of integrating in Limburg. We reunited 60 women in Maastricht, majority migrant women from the refugee center, to talk about the challenges of integrating in the region. So we discussed several topics. We discussed inclusion of migrant women on the labor market. We discussed social and identity and cultural challenges of integrating in Limburg, and we discussed the legal issues faced by migrant women when they come to Europe. And it's this last topic that I would like to address here, why a common approach to these legal issues, a common European approach to these legal issues is needed. And I would like to conclude with a few recommendations for the European institutions in how to address these legal issues. Basically, with the increase of migrants and women migrants from countries such as Eritrea and Syria, countries with an Islamic legal order, we see that EU courts increasingly face cases where both the EU legal order and the Islamic legal order is applicable. And this leads to very complex issues, especially in terms of family law and private international law. So, for example, on issues like divorce, marriage, heritage, alimentation. So, for example, if there's a woman from Syria who files for a divorce in Europe, she might want to have appeal to the remaining part of her bridal gift, which is a legal construct in an Islamic legal order, but she would also want to appeal to her right, which falls on the European legal legal order. This is, as I said, it leads to very complex issues for EU courts. There has been research done about this under the Relegare project by Professor Marie-Claire Faublet from the KU Leuven. And there are a few recommendations that are made in 2013 that still are still applicable to the situation today. So, for example, a recommendation was that the European Commission should have a better understanding about how these competing legal orders deny the basic rights of these migrants and migrant women within the EU. And in line with this, it's important that there is more legal coherence and mutual recognition between EU courts on these issues. So when there is a woman who has, for example, an issue with divorce, when she wants to move to another country in the EU, it's important that the EU court in that other country also understands the decision made by an EU court of the other country. So this is very important that there is a European approach to this. And there's also a need for so there's also a need for a coherent approach to the assessment of the Islamic legislation. So how do you assess the impact of Islamic legislation on the case in question? So every court in every member state does that in a different way. So this is very important. And lastly, it's very important that there is an increase in knowledge sharing, capacity building, cooperation among judges in the European Union, but also better knowledge sharing and information for migrants and especially migrant women on these issues, because during our event, it was clear that there are a lot of legal issues that Muslim women face in the EU. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And now there is a video we have prepared in Brindisi about the initiative EU-MED. If we can take a look.
Anni di lavoro in campagna sono stati sacrifici da schiavi.
Tornassi indietro non lo farei più questo lavoro.
Ho fatto 42 anni di lavoro e basta, sono stanco, basta.
La rabbia che ho addosso la riservo solo ai padroni e agli sfruttatori.
Purtroppo ci trattano da schiavi, è inutile che ci trattano da schiavi, purtroppo.
Non lavora con un caporale Luigi, lui lavora proprio direttamente con un'azienda. Lavora con un padrone.
Sì, meglio non parlare.
Chiamiamolo padrone, lui lavora proprio con un padrone.
Io non ce la faccio più a raccogliere i pomodori. Ho le ernie tutte nella spina dorsale. Io vado a fare una minima pensione perché ho 60 anni. Non me la approvano. Puoi andare a lavorare. No, io ero a vedere una moglie di uno di loro, anche loro, quelli che mi dicono che io posso lavorare con questi problemi, era venire un giorno a lavorare, un giorno.
La vogliono portare a 70-77
un
anni.
giorno per vedere cosa significa lavorare con quei dolori.
Milano? No, non mi piace.
Cristiani, 14 anni così.
Come porti Anna?
Non lo
Non ci credo.
Perché sono di quegli aiuti e ogni tanto aiuti pure a me. Ma che 60 casci, ma fa qua. E poi ma c'è questi qua e poi andiamo a a casa.
L'agricoltura sociale è un tipo di agricoltura che non è fondata sul profitto soltanto, ma cerca anche di includere, cerca di coinvolgere soggetti anche fragili e una forma potente di integrazione.
Per fare una salsa da 700 ml ci vuole 2 kg di pomodori, vuol dire che 2 kg di pomodori al massimo, diciamo, sono 50 centesimi. Vuol dire che qualcuno ha pagato per avere questo prezzo basso e sono sicuramente il lavoratore, non certamente l'imprenditore.
Il caporalato non nasce con i migranti, caporalato è un fenomeno che ha caratterizzato, pensate a Di Vittorio, no? Quindi questo fenomeno c'è e che oggi riguarda ovviamente la maggior parte dei lavoratori. Se la maggior parte dei lavoratori diventa migranti, si trasferisce dal nativo, dall'italiano, dal brindisino al migrante.
So, hi, good morning also from my side. Thank you for being here. I'm Marianna Stori from Fondazione Feltrinelli, and basically we wanted to show you this video because one of the events that we organized, the initiative we organized was based in Brindisi. So basically we took that video with the idea of telling stories of indecent work condition, labor exploitation, underpaid work in the agricultural sector that in Italy has been existing for years, especially in some parts, but that now is a work that in the last few years has been done by migrant workers that or a part of having the same this condition of worse condition, in the majority of cases, they do not have even citizenship possibilities. So the possibility to exploit migrant worker is even worse. What this is leading to a sort of big, huge group of invisible people living in many of our territories. And the initiative that we organized at Fondazione Feltrinelli looked at migrants, people, and people with the migrant background, looking in particular at two perspectives. First, we looked at migrant workers hired illegally, what's in Italy is called caporalato, that live in southern Italy. There we are in Brindisi, in Puglia, so in the south. And we looked at the angle of migrants' rights, working condition, and then the life and involvement in the community. So the sort of integration with the community where they live or no integration. Then we looked also at the second generation migrants in the urban periphery of Milan, something that in Italy is still something seen as new, even if many times in Italy we are at second, third, fourth generation of even not migrants, because this is how they are recognized in the public media, but they are not anymore in that flow. These are like two aspects that for us show a very complex situation that, and I just wanted now to give you, with the time we are still having, some snapshot of what we discussed about. In the agricultural sector, immigrant workers are more than, in Italy, are more than 350,000, and 1/3 of them, more or less, is illegally hired, so irregular workers. Now, in the public discourse, there is not at all the mention of the relation of these migrants with the community and society where they are, because in many cases there is no relation, because they are forced to live in conditions that then put them in sort of banlieue ghettos. And but we think that this is something crucial to change a bit the narrative around the possible relation that could be instead created with the communities, with the society that where they live. Now, what are the two kind of rights that here are the problem, we think, and some things that we discussed in the event that we organized in Brindisi with local communities, with unions, migrants unions. The point is the relationship between worker rights and citizenship rights. So basically, compared to the normal Italian workers, what's happened with immigrants is that lacking working workers' rights and lacking citizenship, this is a sort of chain that puts them in abuse of condition, exploitation, and the situation that where they cannot live, because without it's more easy for exploiters to put them in worse condition because they need work and they don't have citizenship. So it's a sort of dog that hides his queue, we say in Italy. So the aspect of this is that also is a lack of relation with the communities, so the local places where they live. So in terms of services, in terms of welfare, in terms of what this move is to lose completely the possibility to foster social cohesion and to foster possibilities for the entire territories to improve the general situation with enriched by the richness and the cultural differences present in the territories where they live. So these provoke negative externalities that at the end touch everyone, migrants and the native communities of those territories. So we think that what especially was said during these events, that improving migrants' rights on both fronts, so citizenship and work rights, would help enhance social cohesion in general and create a powerful engine to create stronger local communities. Another strong point that arises from this is that even if they are not officially recognized in this case, then migrants are an integral part of the workforce in Italy from the north to the south. So somehow being legal or not, but they contribute to Italian GDP, to Italian economy. They are necessary to the economy, and so they should be seen as integral part of community, recognizing rights, their role and their contribution. Something that is not recognized, and in the narrative media is something that instead is seen as another, in another way. So they stole our job, they do not want to do anything, and the laziness of this. I think I will, as we do not have much time, I will close this, and hopefully there will be more time then to discuss to the other side, that is the education, second generation, that also there we have in Italy strong problems with citizenship rights and their recognition in the entire territory.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And as we draw to a close, I give the floor to Mrs. Bertie de Salin, right, of AMEL France, and about narration and counter narrations. You have 3-4 minutes maximum.
Yes, I'll try to be as brief as possible. So I work with AMEL France, there's an association based in Grenoble, and pretty much what I do is I try to document everything that has been said, well, not everything, but as much as possible of what has been said today. And we try to think about ways of telling all those stories. And so with the EU-MED program, we organized several events and exhibitions surrounding a comic that I wrote that is called Les Oubliés des Îles Grecques, so the Forgotten Ones, and that try to shine the light on the impact of the COVID crisis in the refugee camps on the Greek islands. So basically, as in every precarious situation, the most vulnerable people, are the most impacted by the crisis, and the COVID crisis was a way to just highlight everything that was already problematic before. And so creating a comic that is accessible online was a way to create an educational tool, and kind of interrupting with the simplistic approach of telling those stories and taking the time to actually create a dialogue between the one that are the first concerned by those horrible conditions and the ones that try to help. And for me, yeah, it's really important to just give back their voices to the ones that are first that can actually tell the best what they're living. And so yeah, I'll stop here because I know that's no, it's fine. But if you do want, I mean, I'm better at telling my stories through the comic. So anyway, if you want to read it, I can give you the link before, after.
Can you give us the link now?
Yes, of course. It's The Forgotten Ones. In French, it's Les Oubliés des Îles Grecques, and it's accessible online. It's in French and English, and it pretty much sums up what's going on in the Greek islands. So yeah.
Thank you so much for this. And before getting to the final conclusion, we have the pre-final. We welcome Brando Benifei, Socialist MEP, and that's been working on themes like immigration for a long time. But we are a little bit stalled at the moment in Europe. Brando, what do you think?
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, for all this long journey. This project is a long journey in very important discussions. You have it also today, and I really appreciate this effort by all the partners, first of all, the Fondazione Feltrinelli, but also all the academia, all the organizations that are involved for their effort. I see that my colleague Pier Francesco has joined with him, with other colleagues. I know you heard from Pietro Bartolo, from Alessandra Moretti. We have been working on these topics together for with the conviction that we need to build a new model and a new narrative. I've been a parliamentarian, even if I'm the younger one, I'm the longest serving. So I was also in the previous mandate. And in the previous mandate, we were hit by the refugee crisis without being able to deal with it. And we were falling to narratives of hatred, of fear, and of impossibility to deal with new phenomena. I think things are changing in society, are changing in culture, and changing in the public debate. But we still have pushes in other directions, in directions of exclusion and of separateness. And the EU is not doing enough. The EU is not doing enough institutionally. I was going to that. I think we are not doing enough because we have a pact on migration on the table that is still looking backwards. We still don't invest enough on integration and cultural dialogue. We don't invest enough on building more resilience of our societies, so that in the end we have the creation of scapegoats, the fighting between different vulnerable groups for scarce resources. We have a way out, and I conclude on this. One is that we all push politically so that our governments, our representatives, not just in the parliament that is a bit more on the forefront of finding solutions, but on the other side of the spectrum of the EU institutions, the governments get pushed, get pressured to give answers, not propaganda on these issues. And on the other hand, we have an opportunity with the Next Generation EU, with the structural funds in this new programming, because we can build good examples of a new model that we can already foresee, for example, at local level, that we can build with the civil society. So we need to build an avant-garde that can put politics in front of its responsibility. Because the situation is complex. As I said, we have governments that have been blocking any solution on solidarity, on a common policy, on the fluxes, on the legal migration, on putting also a different narrative. We need to overcome that. We cannot surrender to that. This means that we need to put a challenge forward, that we can also build inside the EU a cooperation of states that want to do more and better. We need to put this challenge on the table very clearly. And as I said, we can do a lot from the local level and the civil society, so that we can already show that things can be done differently, can be different. And your work on different angles that you have done with the various, I participated online to the Palermo moment, but also in France you had, and in other places, also here, different moments, and I'm happy that this project, I think, will bring further steps for this common effort that I think can unite all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we need a coalition of the willing.
Yes, kind of. Yes. Good. You see the journalistic.
Just to be concise, and Caterina, we come to you. Caterina Di Fazio again. So I need you to be concise now.
Very concise.
What are the 3-4 max points out of this discussion, 1.5 that we've been together?
Amazing. And in 2 years we've been together. So,
well, but
very
concise. Yes, very
so,
concise.
No, we were saying before with Pietro Bartolo, the crisis now, the demographic crisis and the climate crisis, the main answer seems to be the creation of legal and safe pathways for migration. So that's the main idea. So the starting point of the EU-MED, and this is of course in line with the grant that we received, the Year for Citizens, is a multi-stakeholder approach. You find it also in the title. So our events all included the participation of politicians at the local, national, EU level, practitioners, NGOs, migrants, scholars, and migrants themselves. So we need to fill the gap between these different realities to challenge the dominant narratives on migration that equals migration and insecurity, or security, and produce counter-narratives that can in turn influence more innovative and inclusive policies. So it is imperative to involve all these different societal actors. So to promote innovative and inclusive policies, we need consensus for migration. This starts from citizens, from European citizens, of course. And also we need to say that there cannot be any integration without labor. In Italian, we would say that l'integrazione passa attraverso il lavoro. EU-MED demonstrated that a central counter-narrative that should be put forward is the one to consider migrants rather as workers, starting from the evidence of their active contribution to society and to our economy. This cannot proceed from granting them the status of workers with all the relevant workers' rights. And this is even more urgent if we consider climate change and the need to implement as soon as possible the Green Deal. Green and digital sectors will need workforce. And when working on creative new legal pathways for migration, this is where we should look at. Again, as Pietro Bartolo was saying, funding efforts need to be redirected from borders to labor, and green labor for sure. In other words, if the issue of climate change can be tackled only via the promotion of the green transition, one of the main points of the European Commission, the so-called migration crisis calls for the formulation of a just transition for migration. This is a thought I owe to my colleague here, Annelies, from Maastricht University. So for this task, our consortium might as well consider to expand this project, looking at different resources and grants, among which the AMIF Horizon Europe and the new SERV that we learned of today. And lastly, evidence in our research findings prove not only that migrant workers, and notably women, and I want to quote one of the migrant women that I met in a room where she was saying, I'm going to say it in French first, on a quitté le pays des droits de l'homme pour arriver dans le pays des droits de la femme. We left the country of men's rights to get to the country of women's rights. So shall not be considered merely as a vulnerable part of the population because they indeed represent accelerators of sustainable development, but also that migration, or more broadly human mobility, has the potential to enhance cultural exchange, tolerance, inclusiveness, and by all these means, migration can also help in promoting peace. So the aftermath of the Ukraine war, if there's a counter-narrative—
You have 30 seconds.
I have less, 5, that Europe and European citizens shall embrace today, a counter-narrative that we shall embrace today, is the perspective of migration for peace. Thank you.
And thank you. That was excellent. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Thank you.